Now, I don't need this master template 2, because that's the one I built to show you. I've already got my master template, which is subtly different because it has got a build notes file in it as well, and it's also got a template script. That's the only difference between the one that I built on screen and the one that is already here. The only other difference, it's an invisible difference, is that I modified my mod kit master with one file because I'm building on Mac. This is the thing, if you are building for Mac and not for PC, this is a tutorial essentially for PC. If you're building for Mac, you need a different asset bundler. So you might see some little console errors on mine. It's just to do with the asset bundler that I'm using for Mac. If this sounds like technobabble, don't worry about it. If you're building for Windows, don't worry about it. If you're building for Mac though, then feel free to DM either me or River, I think, has got a copy of the file that you'll need, and either one of us will be able to talk you through how to use that. So, my master template 2 and my new project, which I've just created, I'm going to drop in the trash. And I'm going to duplicate my original master project, like that. And I'm going to rename this to T-Words, which is the actual project that we're going to be working on. Now, because today I went back and tried to reteach myself how to build a manual from scratch because I haven't done it for a while, looks like I succeeded in teaching myself, but in the process of doing that I managed to delete the original HTML manual of T-Words, which means I've only got the PDF, which is possibly a good thing because it means I'm going to have to rewrite the HTML and I might have to demo that as well. But it's a bit of a pain in the arse because I now don't have my manual except in PDF format, but that's okay, we'll work around it. Now, this is a personal preference, this is not something you absolutely have to do, but if you go into here into the build notes, this is what I keep for every single one of my modules. Let me show you a more interesting one than the template one. Algebra, I think, is probably the most interesting. There we go. So this is the format that I have. I have title and version number, flavor text, module ID, created by, and any other credits. So sometimes it's created by might be the person who's written the manual, and then it'd be implemented by me. Twitch plays, implemented, manual overhaul, and any other things, and then the link to the repository. And then down here I have all the different build notes, and I keep these because I think it's good to just have a record of where you've been and to look back, and also because I'm a little bit OCD about the way files are done. But every time there's a new build, for whatever reason, even if it's something as simple as a corrections to TP, it's a little bug fix, or if it's something as drastic as a 1.2 where I add new formulae, I just log it in this notes file. Say this is entirely optional, and it's just something that appeals to the we'll say the OCD in me. So at the moment we've got flavor text and template, and I now need to get hold of the manual, which I can't remember where I put it. I'm hoping I left it in PDFs. I did not, which means I'm going to have to download it from my own Dropbox. Oh yes, there's a fatal error because I still had Unity open when I deleted it, so that's what that is. Don't panic about that, you shouldn't have that. Although if I've crashed the whole system, that would be annoying. Quick, there we go. Right, I'm just going to go and find the manual, so it's going to pop into Twitch Plays a minute, and go to my Dropbox, and download on the subject of T-Words. It's ridiculous, I'm having to download my own manual. Oh no, Dropbox doesn't work like that, does it? Talk among yourselves. Download, that's what I want. Okay. So, and there are my T-Words where I got them from. So I was going to pop this into my my working folder right here. On the subject of T-Words, I'm going to open this up as a PDF and pop that to one side, and we'll come back to that in a little while. The reason I went to get that was actually because I wanted the flavor text. So I'm going to put my flavor text in, paste and match styles. Module ID is going to be T-Words, no hyphen, lowercase t, uppercase w, created by Royal Flush. If this follows the same formula, it's going to be T-Words. No, it won't, it'll be T-Words. That hyphen will be something else, it'll be like %27 or something, but for now, that will do. I'm going to get rid of that line. Control A, Control C, Control S, Control Q. So there's my build notes done. going to go into here, rename my template to T-words. I'm going to rename that in a bit, not just now, for a reason that will become clear to you later on. And I'm going to open T-words. And yes, as Porky's pointed out, you can see my build notes on the Steam Workshop page. I've missed a little bit of chat. Constantly buffering fast, buffering more than it's playing, so I'm going to have to follow along on YouTube. Chat there, cool. Matt needs a different file to create the mod bundle. Someday the devs will prove the guy that fixes the bug. Yes, indeed. See the build notes and see. Yeah, panic. Everything is burning. Everything is on fire. But everything is hopefully now recovering. How many have we got? 16. You're very welcome, 16 people. It's lovely to see you. So again, as before, I'm going to rename this to T-words. And I'm going to rename my BOM module to T-words and T-words, because that's the actual name with the hyphen. I'm going to go to configure. I'm going to go to T-words. I'm going to go T-words. I'm going to paste my description in there and go version 1.0. And I'm going to get rid of the build notes because I don't put the build notes into the description. They go when I upload it to Steam a bit later on. And now that's all there, ready to go. It's not finalised because I'm not sure that URL is correct, but there's something there. And the first thing I'm going to do now is rename that to Twords and drag my prefab. Okay, and save. Template 1.0. Where did I put template 1.0? Was that in configure, or was that just the old one? Yeah. Template 1. Oh yes, it is called template 1. Well spotted. Well spotted, Porku. Good man. Let's change that to T-words as it should be, which means that also means I need to change it in the build notes, which I'm going to do now because that's the sort of thing I forget about and then never ever update. So I'm just going to nip back to there and go T-words. Save. Okay. Now it's time to get on with something more interesting. I'm just going to slightly readjust myself because I'm in the living room at the moment, so I might just bring the laptop a little closer to me. I'm also going to have some wine and sort of generally just readjust myself because I've been talking on this non-stop for an hour. Take my glasses off. And my jacket. Okay. So this is where the mod creation process proper begins. We've got our prefab and it looks nice, but at the moment it doesn't do anything. Let's start by taking a look at our manual. Now different people will approach this in different ways. Some people, I know Timwi is a really good one for this. Timwi will more or less design his entire prefab in code. And do as little as possible in the inspector in Unity. I'm sort of the other way around. I will do relatively little in code and I will try and do more in the inspector. There was a conversation in the Discord the other day with Secmix and Timwi and a few others, and Mark Sam as well. Marcus, which way do you prefer to do it? Do you prefer to set defined arrays in code, or do you prefer to set them in the inspector? A lot of it is personal preference, and I'm just going to show you the way that I do this. So first of all, I'm looking at this, and I'm going to need 4 buttons, each with a different T-word on it, and I'm going to need a little light at the top. All right. I'm actually not going to have 4 buttons. I'm going to have 4. It's going to be more souvenir-y. But I'm going to show you how to do 4 buttons and how to do the highlights and stuff for them, because I think it's an important thing to learn. It's one of the most basic things you'll do when it comes to creating mods. So let's start off with some buttons, shall we? Now, I'm going to use these custom assets, these really very lovely buttons by the lovely, lovely AshTheBash. Please let us have them free of charge. Now, he's because of the way he's done this in Blender, these are all bundled into one object. So if I go into my custom assets and I select my buttons, you'll see they're all one object. Now, what object I want will depend on my mood or what sort of shape I want to have. Since I'm not actually going to be using these, I'm going to be using actual text, which I'll show you about in a bit. It doesn't really bother me that much, so I'm going to go for this one, square button 014 to 1, and I'm going to take a little mental note of that, square button 014 to 1. If I drag that into the inspector, you'll see it's dragged all of the buttons in. So I wanted square button 014 to 1. Was it that one? Square but keyboard, no, I don't remember which one it was now. Which one was it? Square button 014, that was it, square button 014 to 1, I thought it was. Right, so I'm now going to drag that out of this block of buttons. It'll ask me if I want to break it, and yes I do. And I'm going to get rid of the rest of them. I now have a square button 014 to 1. I'm just going to rename this to 1 for now. You'll also notice you can't see anything. If I zoom out, you'll see why you can't see anything. It's because it's the world's largest button. So we're going to need to do a little bit of rescaling. My standard default is to go down to 0.1, 0.1, 0.1. Still too big. Okay, let's go down by another factor of 10. 0.0001, 0.01, 0.01. Okay, now it looks like it's fitting onto the module. Now we right click and we can move it around and we'll get a bit of an idea of where it is. These arrow buttons will let you manually drag around your button. As much as possible we want to try and do stuff with the transform over here, but I'm just going to drag this up to here and see where we want it. I'm just going to pop it right there. Now, I'm about to use a posh word, which I'm not entirely sure what it means, I have a vague idea, but these buttons are not UV mapped, which means if you want to put a funky texture onto it, just to show you an example, I'm going to Materials and Custom Textures, Materials. If I want to put that wood onto the screen, I can do that, that's fine. If I try and put it onto the button is just going to go brown, okay? What that means is it doesn't know how this button is mapped. It doesn't know how to fold, essentially, is the way of thinking about it, how to fold the material around the object. So it just picks one of the textures there and covers the whole thing with it, which is generally okay. I find it's fine if you want to doing basic buttons with just basic textures and materials on them. That's absolutely fine. If you wanted, reason for that enormous size, just so that each dimension is in unit length. The reason 4 to 1 is that the length is 4 times the length of its height, so the button size will in theory be 4 units wide, 1 unit high, and then there's a depth as well, 1 unit. Thank you very much, Ash. It's always good to have the developer on the speed dial. If you really wanted a button that had a texture on it and you weren't fussed that it didn't have these nice little contours that this button's got, so if you zoom in it looks like a button. If you really wanted something, you can just right click, go 3D object and cube. Again, we're going to need to resize. Let's go 0.4, 0.04, 0.1, 0.1. And there's a roughly a button. And we put that texture on, and then we can have that. I think for most of my modules, the button shape is more important than the texture. Very often. In the rare occasion that it's not, I will use a cube and use a custom texture like that. So let's get rid of that for now because we want to use this button. Now, we're going to need 4 of these buttons on this module. What I might do is just show you very quickly how to create a colour. Let's say I don't want my button to be this standard colour. In fact, the standard material on this is standard, which is not at all what we want when it comes to the game. So before we go into the details of this, let me show you the basics of creating a material. Now, materials are essentially the things that the objects are made of. Now, because this can only have very basic colours, because it's not UV mapped, I need a colour. Now, I've got all these standard colours here, and you can have all of these. These are all available for free in my little bundle pack, and there's some textures that go with them there for the unlit stuff, which I'll get to in a bit. But let's say none of those colours suit you. The first person to comment in the chat with a colour that they want is the material I will create. While you all squabble over doing that, I'm going to have some wine. Name a colour. This is where no one says anything. Of course, I'm about 15 seconds behind you, so. Is anyone going to name a colour? Cyan. Oh, Ash got there first. Of course, he's giving me a. You git. All right. Let me. I'll try Ash's first because he's given me a Unicode colour, and if not, I'll make Porcu's Cyan. So, in our, probably within a folder where they're all going to be kept, and that's why I'm doing this here in standard colours, you're going to right-click, create material. And you get a little material, it's called new material. We're going to call this Ash's Crazy Colour. And I call it that, mainly because I don't know what code that line reflects yet. Before we do anything, we need to change the shader. Now a shader is a little code that tells the material essentially how it is going to look. And there is a standard shader that is used, and if you saw in modding earlier on when I was doing the Jack-o'-lantern, which is Legends manual, you might have seen me getting in some trouble with this. But as a general rule, when you're creating materials for KTaNE, you want to go KT, Mobile, Diffuse Tint. I'll do that again. Select your new material, newly created material, come up to Shader, KT, Mobile, Diffuse Tint. There are a few exceptions to that. GUI will do when we get to doing text a bit later on. Blend Unlit is if you want it to glow in the dark. Transparent you might want to use from time to time as well. There's a few options, but for now we're going to go with Mobile Diffuse Tint. Now, to make this a colour, I can do one of two things. I can either add a texture to it. In this case, there's a wood texture that I've got right there, and it will immediately give it that wood texture. You can see it's only going to go brown on the button because, as I've said, the button is not UV unwrapped. But if I were to put that there, I'm going to get the brown texture there. That's one way of doing it. And you can import your own textures. So if I were to, for example, just to show you a texture, what's really good, hazard material. And this is really, really helpful for this sort of thing. If you go to Google image search, hazard tape, for example, or even hazard tape material. Well, let's just take that one. It looks hideous, but it'll do. You go view image, save image as, I'm just going to put it on the desktop, we'll call it hazard map. Come back to my desktop, there's my hazard map. And all I'm going to do is drag this into my custom textures folder. There you go, okay. If I now go to my custom textures folder and drag this onto my button, okay, the button's not UV unwrapped, so that's fine, but it's automatically created a material for me right there. And you can do that with textures. Textures will automatically create their own material. Now if I look at that material, it's probably not what we want. You see it's gone standard again, so we need to go KT, Mobile, Diffuse Tint. Changes it slightly, but more importantly is if we take that and put it on the background, we've now got a different style of background. So yes, they really should be UV mapped at some point. In your own time, Ash, I know you're busy. So that is how you'd create a custom material from a texture, but we wanted to make a standard colour, so I've got my Ash's Crazy Colour right here. I don't want to create a texture from it. If I did, that was the hazard map right there. So I'm going to get none, and I'm going to go to tint right here. This is how you get your base colours. Now, that string of... needs more JPEG. It does need more JPEG, doesn't it, Porky? That string of stuff, what Ash gave me before, I'm going to type into here. So it's going to be hash A92. I bet this is going to be green, just a hunch. 8CD. And I'm wrong, it's purple. A92 8CD. So that's what Ash gave me right there to create my hex colour for Ash's Crazy Colour, which now I know is actually a very, very pretty shade of purple. Kudos to you, Ash. That's a really lovely colour. I'm going to call that purple, and it just becomes one of my other materials. Now to apply that, I just go like that. Now if we want to make this module a little bit funky, I've got a sudden urge to sing Everything is Awesome. Everything is awesome. It's like the yeah, it's like the rainbows coming out of my eyes. I think the button would even be better as red, maybe. Look at that. Okay, and you can have so much fun just dragging these materials into your prefab and make it anything you want. I had a lot of fun with this in the accumulator now. How close did my run pick get to the Twitch official colour? You weren't far off, actually. It's a really pretty shade of purple, Ash. I have to commend you on that, and highest praise to you on that. I'm just going to reset the standard. Actually, no, I want black for that, don't I? Black matte and component. There you go. So that's how you're going to create materials. Hopefully that was Panda says 8AB2. Shall we try that, Panda? 8AB2. No, that's not right. 8A2B2. There we go. That's Twitch Purple. The official Twitch Purple. Now, we're all having a lot of fun here. Oh, we're out of wine. We're going to have to open another bowl. Never fear, I've got one all set up. But yeah, we're not any closer to actually making a mod yet, but as I say, this is quite a lot of fun. But just to remind you, create, material, standard, KT, mobile, diffuse Tim. If we need to do anything differently, we'll get to that in due course. Okay, let's start making this module a little bit more like a module and less like a hunk of plastic. I'm going to make this a little bit wider, not a lot, but a little bit wider. So it's going to increase my X scaling to 1.5. And I'm going to drag it over here because I want my 4 buttons to come down like this. Actually, no, I'm going to keep it in the middle, I think. I'll just move it up a bit. So 275, that seems like a, what's the Y going to that? That's Y. 275 seems like a good idea. Okay, this is one, if you're new to coding, this will probably be one of the most complex parts of it. I need 4 buttons, and they're all essentially going to do the same function. They're all going to be 4 buttons with text on them. So what I'm going to actually do is create one and then duplicate it. But these buttons have got to contain text, and they've got to contain a highlight. Now, I know a lot of people have struggled with highlighting, and it can be a little bit like sort of that of a learning curve when you first start doing it. But I'm going to show you how we go about creating a highlight. First of all, we're going to duplicate this object as it is. Control D, Command D, we'll duplicate it, and I'm going to rename it button 1 highlight. After I've done that, I'm going to drag it so it's inside button 1. In fact, all of this needs to be inside T words. There we go. Okay, so my button 1 highlight is exactly the same object, but it's currently now parented to button 1. Now, select the highlight, the new object you've just created, and delete the mesh renderer. So I'll move that up there a minute. For all intents and purposes, this will look like it is deleting the object. And it sort of does. It deletes the renderer. It deletes the thing that is actually rendering the object in the game space. But that's fine because we don't need that there. What we do need though is a KM highlightable. So you're going to add KM highlightable. I did that very quick because I'm going on autopilot. I'm trying to. I've done something I didn't want to do there. I'm going to try and slow down because I'm going to stop being on autopilot. Add component, so make sure your highlight is selected. Add component, KM highlightable. So just type that into the little box. And then set your highlight scale to 1, 1, 1. If you leave it at 0, then it's going to do a weird default scale, which will make it look not like you want it to look. So highlight scale goes to 1, 1, 1. Go back to button 1 and add a selectable. So this object is the highlight. This is the thing that's getting highlit. It creates the highlight. And this is the thing that you're going to select. So you need to add a component, and you're going to type KM and bring up the selectable. KM selectable, there it is. Drop it down. Okay, so I'm going to go through this twice, just so everyone's definitely got it. Parent. Remember before we didn't have a parent? Well, now we have got a parent. Our parent is T words. That's the bundle that we're creating right here. So hit the circle and hit T words. Children, there aren't going to be any children on this object because this is going to be the child. That's going to be the only thing that we're going to press within it. Again, I'm just going to ignore these. The highlight is going to be the highlight that we just created, which in this case is the button 1 highlight. So if we select that, providing that this object has got a highlightable script on it, then we'll be able to select that as our button 1 highlight right there. And that's kind of all you need to do for that bit. We then, having told the child, this is your parent, so if you see what I mean, this is the child object we've got selected, and we're saying here, this is your parent, we now need to tell the parent, this is your child. So we go back to our T words bit, select children, and a couple of ways of doing this, but for now we're just going to change that value, the size, to 1, and you'll see we get a new slot that we can plug our button 1 into. We drag and drop. Now the parent knows that's its child, and the child knows that's its parent. Now at this point, at this point we're going to play, and it might be that you don't actually notice anything when I go over the button, and there's a reason for that I'll go through in just a second. We hit play, we select. Now I'm on that object, but nothing is happening. Now the reason for that is we need to change the dimensions slightly, because at the moment the highlight is exactly the same size as the button. But what we want is the highlight to be slightly bigger than the object that we're highlighting, if that makes sense. It needs to be slightly bigger so that it creates a little box around it. So to do that, we need to change the scale of it. There are some defaults, and a lot of this will be, especially if you're using an odd shape like this, you'll need to do some slight jiggery-pokery, but I'm going to go 1.1 on the X. I'm going to go 0.5 on the Y, so if I think of it, if that's the module you're looking at, top down, X is that way, Z is that way, and Y is this way. Okay, so Y is going to make it slimmer, it's closer to the prefab, 0.5, and then Z 1.1. I'm also going to move the position down on the prefab. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm going to leave that as it is for now and see what happens. So now if we hit play and we roll over it, you see now we've got something, but it's not quite right there, as we can see. That's not quite what we were after. So let's go back to our highlight and see where did we go wrong. It might be entirely possible that I have screwed up the dimensions here. So why is that at -90? I don't know why I put that at -90 for some reason. That is also why that wants to be 1.1 and that 0.5. So if we change those around, let's see how we get now. Okay, now we're getting a little bit closer to what we want it to look like. You can see it's slightly wider than it is tall, essentially. 90Z because Blender and coordinate spaces have, yes, basically that. So what we're going to do is actually we're going to make the y-axis slightly bigger, say 1.3, than the x, and that's going to give us a nice square-ish highlight like that. And actually if we just drag that over to one side, we can look in the scene at the same time, and when we highlight it, you see it comes round. I'll move the position up. If we move the position of the Z up to, say, 0.5, which I was tempted to do before, you might be able to see that there, that the mesh collider of the highlight is actually being brought upwards. So if we highlight it now, it's higher up the module than it was before. But I think it was just nice where it was there, highlighting around the object like that. And that's how you do highlights. That's kind of all there is to it. It's two basically identical objects, one on top of the other, and one of them is invisible until you roll over it. That's how it works. So we've got our button 1 height and our button 1 highlight right there, and that's come out really nicely. The last thing we're going to do is add some text to it before we duplicate it, because these are the buttons that are going to contain our posh words. Much as I love the purple, guys, and it is beautiful, I am now going to change it to something different. In this case, not white because that's dull. Green will do for now. Okay, so next thing is going to be adding text to it. So I'm going to go right click on my button 1, 3D object, and 3D text. And I'll immediately get hello world in some form. It's currently upside down, so we're going to have a little play with the rotation of the transform right here. Is that the one? That's the one. So X, set it to 180. That's a novice-friendly approach to highlights. There are caveats to that if you start to use more complex shaped object highlights. Absolutely, Ash. In fact, there was actually something I reminded myself how to do this morning, to do a triangle highlight. And I was going to show everyone how to do that. But given how long I'm taking so far and the sake of my voice already, I may not do that, but we'll see what we've got time for. Before I carry on, I'm going to open another bottle of wine, so we just ignore that. This computer I bought when I used to work for a school, and for some reason, despite the fact I left over a year ago, they've still got traces of the server on it, and it keeps trying to link it to the school, which is really annoying, especially when I'm trying to stream. Anyway, I've created a little text object there. Now, there's different settings for text that you can use, and it can get reasonably complicated. I'm going to try and keep it as straightforward as possible by going through these one at a time. Up here, the mesh renderer, that's the font material. That's the last thing that we're going to do, because we need to set our text mesh before we set our mesh renderer. All right? But before we even do that, we're going to need a font, because I need to show you how to make your own fonts. Now, I want a really nice loopy handwriting font for this, so I'm going to go to Google Fonts, fonts.google.com. I couldn't have typed that on its own. Let's just unselect these and get handwriting. Let's see if anything's leaping out here. Mist enveloped the ship 3 hours out from port. I want something that's legible but also attractive. This is quite nice. Then came the night of the first falling star. It's not cursive though. And that's a little too difficult to read. That looks too much like mine. Let's see. Someone who was a professional would have had a font all ready to go, wouldn't they? How about this? Silver mist suffused the deck of the ship. That's what we're going to use. That's nice. So we're going to go see specimen, select this font, Rochester, and download. And that's just going to download that into my downloads there. I'm going to click it, and I'm going to get my Rochester regular.ttf. Okay, that's the font we want to use. I'm going to copy that into my assets folder in here. Now, I could put it in materials, but depending how many fonts I'm going to use, I might just want to create my own fonts folder. So I'm going to create a folder there called fonts. And I'm going to drag, first of all, I'm going to install it on the system so that I can possibly use it later on when creating the manual image. Close that down. And drag that into my fonts folder. So there we go, that can go away now. And that's going to just, where am I going? That way. That's going to re-import that into Unity. So, let's go down to my fonts folder. Now, just like with BVD highlights, BVD? What's BVD? I feel I should know what BVD is. Just like when I created the material, the font is just another material, but one that's done in a particular way. So here we're going to go right-click in our fonts folder and create, and go material again. And I'm just going to call this Rochester, the name of the font, matte, short for material. All right. Now, remember before we went up to our shader and we changed it to KT Mobile Diffuse Tin. Now that's if you want something that is going to be a colour or a material or something that is basically anything other than text, and a few other exceptions. In this case though, and this is one of the commonest mistakes that I see people posting in the modding section of the Discord, it comes up all the time, to a point where actually there's been a pinned post created about it in modding and people still ask questions about it. So I'm going to go through it here. You go up to your shader and you go GUI KT3D text. Now the 3D text diffuse is just so the text doesn't glow in the dark. I've never quite been able to get that to work. It normally ends up being something hideous and pink when it goes into the game. So for now, GUI KT3D text. Now this is going to need a texture for it, but the texture it's going to need is this one from the Rochester font that we just created. So with our Rochester matte selected, and you can even press this little, get the mouse to shake, this little padlock button up here to lock the inspector in place. That's a really useful little tip to have actually, if you want to load lots of things into one place. So now if I go and select other things over here, you'll notice my inspector doesn't actually change, it's still locked onto this new material down here. Boolean Venn diagram, thank you Porky. GUI 3D text, you're not a fan, Ash? No, I suppose I probably should be using, what's it called, TextMesh Pro. I don't think I've got TextMesh Pro on the Mac. I use TextMesh Pro in all my other stuff, but force of habit for this, GUI KT 3D text. Anyway, yeah, so put this little padlock on. Don't forget to take it off when you're done, because there's nothing worse than if you, for example, if you need to lock your main object, let's say you're adding a load of selectables to your children, you leave that locked, you go off, you do something else, and then you think, why is the scaling not working? And before you know it, you've completely rechanged the BOM. So I want to change my font to be smaller. Oh God, I've just changed my entire prefab. So make sure that once you put that padlock on, you take it off again, because I've made that mistake more than once. Lock on to the Rochester material. Open up the little extension of the font you've just imported, and there'll be one that's called Font Texture. Drag and grab and drag onto the little square like that, and that's it. Your Rochester mat is now there. Unlock, and let's go back to the text. So, we're going to come back to the font material in a bit. This is going to contain one of our words, and it doesn't matter what it is for now because it's going to change. So let's just take tatterdemalion, which is a great word. In fact, tatterdemalion is probably a good one to use because I think that's the longest word here. And we need this button to be able to accommodate the longest word. GUI 3D text, the one from the wrong side of the bomb, whereas KT GUI 3D text. Oh, I see. Aha, very good. So let's paste in tatterdemalion as our word. Offset Z you don't need to worry about. Character size I generally change to 0.25. That changes the physical size of the characters. One thing I am actually going to do is just drag this out of the hierarchy a minute, and you'll see because I extended the size of this button, you'll see the text actually looks slightly skewed, and if I take that out of the button, you can see why. It's because its X is longer than its Y. Now, because it's text, it doesn't have any Z, so I can set that to 10,000, and it doesn't make any difference at all, because it doesn't have any depth. But this is important, because these should really be the same. So I'm going to set that to 0.15, and now the text looks a little bit more squared. I'm now going to put that back in the button. They're going to change, and the Y is going to look longer than the Z, than the X rather, but that doesn't really matter to us, because, I'll just say, it looks right, and at 0.0, if you like, it's correct. So that can come down to 1 as well, not that it makes any difference. So new text, I might just call this button 1 text. 0.25 line spacing we don't need to worry about. Now, anchor. What this does, it tells us whereabouts the text is going to go in relation to its mesh. So as a general rule, not always, particularly if you're doing stuff with computers and screens, but generally speaking, you want this to be middle center, so that it's going to go in the middle of its mesh. The alignment also wants to be center, generally, not always, but generally. So if I put this at upper left, for example, and then change the alignment, you're not going to see much difference. However, if I change the alignment to left and I write tatterdemalion on toast, you're going to see it's going to carry on because it's aligned to the left. Whereas if I have it centered and write tatterdemalion on toast, it's also seemingly not making much difference. If I go right and go tatterdemalion on toast, okay, that's not making any difference. It's clearly not demonstrating the point I wanted to demonstrate. Maybe if I make it middle center it will. Tatterdemalion on toast, so that's in the center, on toast with eggs. No, it's not making any difference. It's not demonstrating the point I wanted to make. The point I wanted to make was middle center and center. Okay? Tab size we can ignore. Font size. This is an important one. If you set your character size to 0.25, I would generally set your font size to 144. Now, you can get into very fine detail, and it's not always perfect translating the text from the engine into the game, and a lot of the quality is lost. This is why a lot of modern places will now use TextMesh Pro if you're using Unity, which has been acquired by Unity and is now available for free, because it doesn't lose any quality, but it is a little bit more complicated, and this is for basic stuff, like such as we're doing, is fine. You can set it to bold if you like, if it's got a bold setting on that font, bold and italic or italic. I'm going to leave it as normal just for now. And finally, we're going to get to the font. Now this font was called Rochester. So I'm going to select Rochester Regular, and there we have it. I can make that italics, I can make that bold, I can make that bold italic. I quite like it italic actually. Yeah, italic. So let's have it italic. And once we've done all of that, then, and only then, are we going to change our font material to Rochester Matte. Now, notice as soon as I change the material, half the text disappears. That's because, oh shit, didn't need to do that. Excuse me. Let's go back to font material. When I've got it set as a font material is just a standard shader. It doesn't understand what it needs to do, how it needs to render it onto the object. The thing that we've created here, this GUI KT3D text shader, that's actually masked for this sort of thing. Oh, okay. I generally go 144 Ash, but we can take it down by half if we like to that. I'm going to get to the scaling last. Normally I would go 144 and then scale down like that, but you can also go have that and not scale this down quite so far. But I'll get to that in a minute in more detail. First of all, I was just, oh shit, no, I didn't need to do that. That's what I wanted. Yeah, because we've set this up with the GUI shader, it tells it that it's text and that it shouldn't show up behind items, because so often you see people coming, hang on, I've got my thing in game, but I can see my text on the other side of the object. That means you haven't set the shader up correctly. So if you go here and we find our Rochester Matte, now our text seemingly disappears, because at this point it's actually underneath our button. Yeah, I'll fix the scale in a minute, Porky. I'm going to drag this up until it's just poking out at the top of the button. A fairly good reference point is to go for 0.54, and you can zoom in on that to see exactly where that is. It's just floating above the button, so maybe I'd get away, excuse me, get away with 0.53. There we go, and that's quite nice. I'm going to drag that text out and just check that the scaling's all the same. It is. And now I'm going to put it back in. I'm going to stick with the font size at 72 for now. Now bear in mind that is the biggest word. Problem with specifying 144 is that it would generate a really big texture for the dynamic font, although yeah, it gives you more detail and precision. I find it's not really that necessary. I'd even go something like 50 or even less for this situation. So there you go, there's a difference of opinion between Ash and myself, although Ash gets paid to do this sort of thing, so he's probably a better reference to draw from. Now, I might just make this button a little taller. Now that's because I want to make my word bigger, but I can't make it much bigger without really stretching it. Now I could stretch it along the x-axis like this, but it's going to start looking really stretched and not very cool at that point. So in order to get away with it, I need to make the button taller. So before I can do that, I need to take the text out. We take the text out because if we stretch the button with it like that, it's going to stretch the text with it. If the text is no longer a part of that object, we can just give it a little stretch like that and then pop the text back in. From here, I can multiply my text. So if I go to my scale box, I go times, say, 1.5. That looks perfect to me. Times 1.5, and there we go. Tatterdemalion, a lovely word on there. And so just to check, by virtue of the fact that everything is actually working as it seems, bear in mind this is the longest word we're going to get, everything else will be shorter, and that looks like it fits on quite snugly. Let's hit play, and there we go. I can select my Tatterdemalion button. Perfect. Now, you may recall that I said we need 4 of these buttons. And indeed we do. We do need 4. Why I've only created 1? Well, the reason I've created 1 is for the same reason that I keep a master template and just alter the prefab every time from the master. It's because creating that, doing all that, putting the text in and setting up the text configuration and stuff, really tedious. It's not the most interesting of things that you could be doing with your time. So now I've got 1 button, I can do exactly the same thing as I did essentially did before. I can duplicate it 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And you'll see now I've got button 2, button 3, button 4. That's just Control D or Command D. I'm really OCD about this, so I will go through and I will rename all of these. So I've got button 2 highlight, button 2 text, and I'll go button 3 highlight and button 3 text, and I'll go button 4 highlight and button 4 text. Now, the great thing about doing a duplicate thing like that is that if mod selector's font size is actually 24, the character size 16, the quality of the text and that holdable. Oh, your character size is massive. So Ash uses much bigger character sizes and a much smaller font size. So, for example, Ash would do something like this: 16 for character size and 24 for font size, which is massive and not correctly proportioned for what we're doing here, but obviously this is a bigger mod. It's a sort of thing you can experiment with, but one of the things that I do see happening a lot is that people leave that at 0 and have the scaling massive. So they'll have like, I can't even get it to the right size. They'll do something like that, and maybe that's an exaggeration. That maybe, and it'll look really, really blurred or grainy when you can get it a lot sharper with relatively little effort. Okay, button 1 text was AshTheBash, and I've renamed all of these, and yeah, that was it. The great thing about these is that it copies all of the things with the components as well. So there's button 2 that I just duplicated, and there's button 2, and you'll see over here the button 2 selectable has already set up the highlight for us right there. Same when we get to button 3. Button 3 selectable, button 3 highlight. Already duplicated them. The one thing it doesn't do is tell the parent that it's suddenly got more children, which must be very alarming for the parent to find that out in this way. Now remember, before I just changed the size here, I changed that from 1 to 2, from 0 to 1, and I could change that to 2, and I could add them in. But there's a much easier way of doing it if you've got lots and lots. In this case I've got 3. You're going to lock that. Remember what I said before, remember to unlock it afterwards. We've got 3 new items, button 2, button 3, button 4. I'm going to select them all and drag them onto my children, and you'll see it will automatically update button 1, button 2, button 3, button 4, like that. We can unselect it, and now, oh, hang on, they're all in the same place at the moment. We need to move them around a bit. Now this is where having the transform up here becomes really, really helpful. Now 2.75 is what I set button 1 at. So button 2, if we go minus 0.015, that's not far enough. 0.03, that looks like it's far enough. Okay, we select button 3, minus 0.03, that's to the same place. So we want to go minus 0.03 again. You can shortcut that, of course, by going minus 0.06. Finally, button 4, it's going to be minus 0.09. And what that does is give you a really nice, easy way to give sort of uniform spacing to multiple objects. And you can see now they're really nicely spaced out. And because they've all got a highlight on them, you can see I can select them all like that. Now the one thing I do need to do is go and put some more text in. So let's have techioscopy. Let's get taphrogenesis for button 3. And finally let's get button 4 where we get tabernacular. It's a good word. Now, even though tatterdemalion is the longest word, you might just be able to see that taphrogenesis is just in danger, and tachoscopy as well, tachioscopy, are just in danger of creeping off the bottom of the buttons there. Yet we have got a little bit of room at the top. So what we can do here is select all our text at once and just give it a little manual adjustment. so we get it into the right place. Now we might find we haven't quite got enough room to do that, so actually we want to set it back to 0, and we're going to have to make these buttons slightly taller, or the text slightly smaller. In fact, that's the way I'm going to go. So I'm going to go times 0.95. So it's just very, very slightly reducing the size, 0.95. We could possibly even reduce that one by a little bit more, and then just bump them up. So now we've got something like that. Incidentally, that little tip there where I open all of my objects in the hierarchy, if you press Alt, it will open all the objects in the hierarchy and close all the objects in the hierarchy, which when you get projects that are like 10,000 objects long, that can be really helpful. So there we go. Tatterdemalion, Techioscopy, Taphrogenesis and Tabernacular. This is shaping up to be quite nice. And that's my module so far. And that is how you do selectables and highlights and text, which is essentially the sort of basics of what you're going to need to do. If you are playing along at home, then great. If you've sort of felt like you've got a little bit lost at some point, that's fine, don't worry. What I'm actually going to do at this point, because I've been going for coming up 2 hours, I'm just going to take a little break, just stretch my legs, have some wine, go and see my wife and stuff. Please don't go anywhere. I'm going to be back in a minute to start talking about how we do some of the coding. I'm going to add a few more objects to this. In fact, what I might do during the break as well is I might just change this, because I actually want it to look slightly different from this. But for a beginner's tutorial, this is kind of all you need. It's best to work with buttons. I'm going to make it look a little bit different, so I might do that while we're on break. So yeah, maybe give us 10, maybe 15 minutes, and I'll be right back with you. But thank you for tuning in so far. I hope you're all learning something, having a good time, finding it enjoyable. I will be back very, very soon. We'll just go for a little break.